there is a peculiar arrogance to the present moment. We look back through the lens of our own achievements and assume that history is a straight, unbroken line, an ascent from the primitive to the sophisticated, from the mud hut to the skyscraper. We assume that those who came before us knew less, built smaller, and dreamed more simply. But time is not a line, it is a palimpsest, like a medieval manuscript scraped clean and written over again. The story of human civilization is a layering of memories. Empires rise not on virgin earth, but on the ruins of those they have forgotten. We walk upon the bones of eras that have dissolved into dust, leaving behind only riddles carved in stone, fragments of a story we no longer know how to read. In the silence of the desert, where the wind scours the surface of the world, this truth becomes impossible to ignore. There are places where the stone speaks of a capability that defies our timeline, places that feel less like the beginning of a civilization and more like the remnant of one. Travel to the edge of Cairo, where the chaotic sprawl of the modern city abruptly surrenders to the golden desolation of the Sahara. Here, rising from the limestone bedrock, stand the Great Pyramids of Giza. They are the only surviving wonder of the ancient world, and yet the word wonder feels insufficient. They are mathematical mountains. The Great Pyramid alone consists of 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 80 tons, fitted together with a precision that modern optical equipment can barely improve upon. Stand at the base of the Great Pyramid, look up at that staggering slope of masonry. The sheer physical presence of the structure exerts a weight on the soul. It feels eternal, immutable, a static point in a turning world. Open any standard history textbook, and the explanation is confident, precise, and settled. We are told that these colossal structures were raised during the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom, roughly 4,500 years ago. The narrative assigns them to 3 specific pharaohs, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. We are told they are tombs, glorious, ego-driven sepulchres designed to launch the God King's soul into the stars. We are asked to believe that in the span of a single century, a civilization that had previously built mostly with mud brick suddenly mastered the quarrying, transport, and placement of 6 million tons of rock, only to never replicate such perfection again. We are told this was achieved with copper chisels, stone pounders, and hemp ropes. It is a story of immense human effort, of hundreds of thousands of laborers toiling under the desert sun. It is a story of a civilization peaking abruptly, exploding into architectural brilliance, and then slowly fading. But if you look closer, if you step away from the summary plaques and walk into the shadows of the plateau, the narrative begins to fracture. There is a dissonance here, a silence where there should be noise. If these were the greatest tombs ever constructed for the greatest kings of the age, why are they so conspicuously empty of the one thing the Egyptians loved most? Writing. Walk through the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, built thousands of years later. Every inch of wall space is covered in hieroglyphs, prayers, and cartouches. They scream the name of the occupant. They provide instructions for the afterlife. The Egyptians were obsessive record keepers. They inscribed their achievements on everything from temple walls to cosmetic palettes. Yet, enter the Great Pyramid, walk the ascending passage, stand in the king's chamber. What do you see? Nothing. Bare, polished granite. No prayers, no names, no Khufu was here. Just an overwhelming, geometric silence. The only writing linking Khufu to the pyramid is a solitary, roughly scrawled mark found in a relieving chamber above the king's chamber. A mark that many controversialists argue was a forgery, or at best, a quarry mark added by a workforce doing repairs, not construction. And then there is the inventory stela, discovered in the ruins of the Temple of Isis. This limestone tablet dates to a later period, but it claims to be a copy of an older text. In it, the pharaoh Khufu, the supposed builder of the Great Pyramid, does not claim to have built the monument. Instead, he speaks of finding the House of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, and carrying out repairs upon it. He speaks of the Sphinx as already existing, ancient even to him. If the pharaohs did not build these monuments, but merely inherited them. If they arrived on the Giza Plateau and found these mountains of stone already waiting, silent and shut against the sky, then who built them? And more importantly, when are we looking at the tomb of a king or the legacy of a forgotten epic? To answer this, we must look past the stone itself and into the impossible precision of its design. To understand the magnitude of the anomaly, we must look not at the silhouette of the pyramids against the sky, but at the microscopic details of the stone itself. We must descend into the physics of the construction. The mainstream timeline places the Great Pyramid in the Bronze Age. We are told that the tools available to Khufu's architects were effectively limited to copper chisels, stone mauls, dolerite pounders, and wooden wedges. Here lies a fundamental problem of material science. On the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, copper ranks at about a 3. It is a soft metal, limestone. The bulk of the pyramid's core is a 3 or 4. You can cut limestone with copper, though it is tedious. But the inner chambers, the heart of the machine, are built of rose granite quarried from Aswan, 500 miles to the south. Granite contains quartz crystals. It ranks at a 7 on the hardness scale. To cut granite with copper is like trying to cut down a redwood tree with a plastic knife. The tool is softer than the material it is attempting to shape. The chisel does not cut the stone. The stone destroys the chisel. Yet inside the king's chamber, we find granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons, cut with surfaces so flat that even today, we would struggle to replicate them. Without diamond-tipped saws and computer-guided machinery, this cognitive dissonance was noted by the very father of modern Egyptology, Sir William Flinders Petrie. In the late 19th century, Petrie was conducting a meticulous survey of the Giza Plateau. He wasn't just an archaeologist, he was a surveyor and an engineer. While examining the granite cores and sarcophagi, Petrie noticed something that shouldn't exist: drill marks. Petrie found circular holes drilled into the hardest diorite and granite, but it was the grooves inside these holes that stopped him cold. He realized that the spiral striations indicated a feed rate, the speed at which the drill sinks into the stone, of 1/10 of an inch per revolution. This is a terrifying statistic for a historian. To achieve that feed rate in granite requires a downward pressure of nearly 2 tons. It implies a tool moving with the speed and rigidity of a modern industrial lathe. A man with a hand crank cannot do this. A team of men pulling ropes cannot do this. Modern engineer and researcher Christopher Dunn has spent decades analyzing these specific artifacts. He argues that the artifacts left behind, including the famous schist disc and the granite coffer in the king's chamber, display evidence of ultrasonic machining or high-velocity rotation. When Dunn measured the flatness of the granite boxes in the Serapeum, massive 100-ton sarcophagi, he found them to be flat within 0.2 teachs of an inch. This is the tolerance of an optical lens, not a tomb for a dead bull. Why would a Bronze Age civilization, supposedly working with pounding stones, need or even be able to measure such unnecessary precision? If the engineering suggests a lost technology, the geology suggests a lost time. Just east of the pyramids lies the Great Sphinx. For centuries, we believed it was carved by the Pharaoh coffer around 2500 BC to guard his pyramid. The face, we are told, is his likeness. But the stone of the Sphinx tells a different story. In the early 1990s, geologist Dr. Robert Schoch of Boston University stood in the Sphinx enclosure, the U-shaped ditch carved out of the bedrock to free the lion's body. He looked at the limestone walls of the enclosure and saw a pattern that every geologist recognizes, but no Egyptologist had wanted to see. He saw deep, rolling, vertical fissures. This pattern is not caused by wind. Wind erosion, combined with sand, creates horizontal stratification, sharp, layered scouring. The patterns on the Sphinx and its enclosure walls are the result of precipitation-induced weathering, heavy, prolonged rainfall. Here is the problem. The Giza Plateau has been a bone-dry desert for nearly 5,000 years. The last time rain fell in sufficient quantities to cause that depth of erosion was during the Neolithic subpluvial, a wet period that ended roughly around 5000 to 7000 BC. If the water erosion theory holds, and hundreds of geologists have since backed Schoch's assessment, it pushes the construction of the Sphinx back thousands of years before the first pharaoh ever sat on a throne. It suggests that the Sphinx was not built in the desert. It was built in a green savanna long before the sands came to bury it. And if the Sphinx is that old, guarding the approach to the plateau, what of the pyramids standing behind it? Were they the silent watchers of a lush, prehistoric Egypt, later claimed and repurposed by a dynastic culture that found them amidst the drying sands? The earth and the stone suggest a history far deeper than our textbooks allow, but the evidence does not stop at the ground level. To understand the true purpose of these structures, we must look up. With such compelling geological and engineering anomalies staring us in the face, a reasonable mind asks,
Look at this reading.
Why? Why isn't this the front page news of every scientific journal in the world? Why does the history book in your child's classroom still teach the timeline of the 4th dynasty without an asterisk? The answer lies not in the soil, but in the psyche. History, as an academic discipline, is a fragile architecture. It is a house of cards. If you pull out the card marked Old Kingdom Egypt, you do not just change the date of a pyramid. You destabilize the entire chronology of human civilization. If the Sphinx is 10,000 years old, then the cradle of civilization in Sumeria is no longer the beginning. The narrative of linear progress, from hunter-gatherer to farmer to builder, collapses. It implies that a high civilization existed during the Ice Age and was wiped out, forcing humanity to start over. To a mainstream academic whose career, tenure, and reputation are built on the orthodox timeline, this is not an exciting possibility. It is an existential threat. It is cognitive dissonance weaponized. This resistance is not merely passive, it is active. The Giza Plateau is not just an archaeological site. It is a controlled environment, guarded by a rigid hierarchy of authorities who decide what gets dug, what gets seen, and what gets published. Those who question the timeline are rarely met with scientific debate. Instead, they are met with ridicule. They are labeled pseudoscientists or pyramidiates. The strategy is not to answer the anomaly, but to silence the questioner. There is perhaps no greater example of this suppression than the saga of the Queen's chamber shafts. In 1993, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink was hired to improve the ventilation in the Great Pyramid. He wasn't an archaeologist, he was a robotics expert. He designed a miniature rover, the Up-You-Out 2, to crawl up the narrow, 8-inch shafts extending from the Queen's chamber, shafts that had remained unexplored for thousands of years. As the robot climbed 200 feet into the dark limestone core, the world watched via video feed, and then it stopped. The robot's camera revealed a small limestone slab blocking the shaft. But this was no ordinary rock fall. It was a polished door, and protruding from it were 2 corroded copper fittings, handles, or perhaps electrodes. It was a discovery that should have electrified the world. A sealed door inside the Great Pyramid, what lay behind it, but Gantenbrink was not celebrated. The day after the discovery, the project was effectively shut down. Gantenbrink was banned from resuming his work. The German Archaeological Institute was squeezed out. It took 9 years before another robot was allowed to return. 9 years of silence. When they finally drilled a small hole through that door in 2002, the live broadcast was tightly controlled, delayed, and ultimately underwhelming, revealing only another rough block. Why the delay? Why the secrecy? Why do the authorities treat the monument not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a secret to be kept? The resistance to these discoveries stems from a refusal to abandon the tomb theory. If you insist these are tombs, every anomaly becomes a mistake. The lack of inscriptions is an oversight. The precision is religious zeal. But if you invert the perspective, if you stop looking for a coffin and start looking at the function, the anomalies vanish. Consider a modern power plant A hydroelectric dam or a radio telescope? Do we cover the internal components of a nuclear reactor with poetry? Do we inscribe the cooling vents with the names of the project manager? No, we leave them bare. We build them with specific materials, granite, copper, quartz, not for aesthetics, but for conductivity, resonance, and durability. The Great Pyramid is a structure of conductive granite and insulating limestone. It is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree. It contains chambers designed to resonate at specific acoustic frequencies. When you view the Great Pyramid as a machine, utilitarian device, left by a culture that valued function over ego, the silence of the king's chamber stops feeling like a mystery. It starts making sense. It wasn't empty because they forgot to write. It was empty because you don't write on the circuitry. But if it is a machine, what was it powering? And where did the builders go? If we step back from the microscope, away from the drill marks and the erosion patterns, and look at the timeline of human existence, a terrifying possibility emerges. Anatomically modern humans have walked this earth for roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years. Yet, our history books only account for the last 6,000. We are asked to believe that for 194,000 years, we did little more than hunt, gather, and gaze idly at the stars, and then, in a sudden, inexplicable flash, we invented agriculture, architecture, mathematics, and writing all at once. This is the light switch view of history. It assumes we were dormant, then suddenly awake. But there is another possibility, a possibility whispered in the myths of every ancient culture on Earth, from the Vedas of India to the Maya of Central America to the Edfu building texts of Egypt itself. They do not speak of a slow ascent. They speak of a golden age. They speak of the first time, Tepi, when gods walked among men and wisdom was absolute. And they speak of how it ended, in fire and flood. We know now that the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, was not a gentle thaw. It was a cataclysm. Sea levels rose 400 feet, swallowing over 10 million square miles of habitable land. The coastlines where civilizations naturally congregate were erased. If a civilization as advanced as ours existed back then, one based on different technologies, perhaps harmonic or resonant rather than industrial, it would have been wiped clean. Its cities drowned, its wood rotted, its iron rusted to dust. Only the stone would remain. This leads us to the ultimate synthesis of the alternative theory. The conflict between the orthodox view and the alternative view creates a false dichotomy. It forces us to ask, did the Egyptians build the pyramids or did aliens? The answer is likely far more human and far more tragic. What if the dynastic Egyptians, the civilization of Tutankhamun and Ramesses, were not the builders of the Giza complex, but its inheritors? Imagine the first tribes wandering into the Nile Valley as the climate stabilized after the Great Cataclysm. They find a lush delta, but they also find these terrifying, silent sentinels rising from the bedrock. Enormous, impenetrable, ancient even then. They do not ignore them. They revere them. They settle around them. They build their culture in the shadow of these giants. They try to emulate the gods. They attempt to build their own pyramids, but they have lost the science. See the bent pyramid of Sneferu, where the angle changes halfway up because the structure was becoming unstable. See the collapsed pyramid of Mitam. See the mud brick pyramids of the Middle Kingdom, which have dissolved into mounds of dirt while the Great Pyramid stands sharp and true. This explains the paradox. The Egyptians were a brilliant, artistic, spiritual people. They were masters of their own time, but the Great Pyramid was not of their time. They claimed it, just as we might claim a Roman fortress and fly a modern flag from its ramparts. They wrote their names on it, buried their kings near it, and tried to touch the hem of the garment of the civilization that came before. Why would that lost civilization build with such excessive, difficult, impossible durability? Why use 80-ton granite blocks when a 2-ton block would suffice? Because they knew that civilization is fragile. They knew that the earth is violent. They understood the cycles of catastrophe that scour the planet clean. If you wanted to send a message to the future, to a time 10,000 or 20,000 years from now, you could not put it on a hard drive. You could not write it on paper. You could not even etch it in steel. All of those mediums perish. You would have to build a mountain. You would have to encode your knowledge, the dimensions of the Earth, the speed of light, the precession of the equinoxes, into the very mathematics of the structure itself. You would build it to withstand earthquakes, floods, and the grinding erosion of eons. The Great Pyramid is not a tomb. It is a time capsule. It is a desperate shout across the abyss of time, saying, "We were here. We knew this. Do not forget." As we stand in the long shadow of the Great Pyramid today, looking up at its apex, we are looking into a mirror. We see ourselves as the masters of the earth. We build our towers of glass and steel, confident in our permanence. But glass shatters, steel rusts, concrete crumbles. If a cataclysm were to strike us today, if our power grids failed and our oceans rose, what would be left of the 21st century in 5,000 years? A layer of plastic? A spike in radiation? Our skyscrapers would be iron skeletons. Then dust. But the Great Pyramid would still be there. It stands as a testament to a level of ambition we have yet to recover. It challenges the arrogance of the present. It suggests that we are not the first to reach for the stars, and we may not be the last to fall. The wind blows across the Giza Plateau, carrying the sand that buries all things in time. The Sphinx stares due east, watching for the sunrise of a new cycle, its eyes fixed on a horizon that we are only just beginning to see. It waits, it remembers, and in its silence, it screams the truth we are too afraid to hear. We are not the beginning of the story. We are merely the survivors,